Order. Now call the Standing Committee on Public Accounts to order. My name is Kelly Regan. I'm the MLA for Bedford Basin, and I'm the chair of the committee. I'm reminding all of our attendees today to place their phones on silent. I'm going to ask the committee members to introduce themselves, beginning with Mr. Young.
Good morning, everyone. Nolan Young, MLA for Shelburne.
MLA Harrison.
Good morning, MLA for Colchester Muscatawbee Valley, Larry Harrison.
MLA McDonald.
Good morning, Johnny McDonald, MLA for Hants East.
MLA Sheehy-Richard.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome. Melissa Sheehy-Richard. I'm the MLA for Hants West.
MLA LeBlanc.
Good morning, Susan LeBlanc, MLA for Dartmouth North.
MLA Burrow.
Gary Burrow, Halifax, Chebucto.
MLA McGuire.
Good morning, everyone. Brandon McGuire, Halifax Atlantic.
MLA Barkhouse.
Good morning, everyone. Danielle Barkos, MLA for Chester St. Margaret's.
And I would note that officials from the Auditor General's office, sitting over in the corner, Legislative Council office, and Legislative Committee's office are in attendance as well. On today's agenda, we have officials with us from the Department of Finance and Treasury Board with respect to the 2023 financial report of the Auditor General. Now, we had an informal meeting last week where a couple of topics were agreed upon. MLA Young has just asked that we deal with this at the end of the agenda. Is that okay with the committee? We were going to deal with it off the top. So last week at the informal meeting at the AG's office, we had two topics that we wanted that we agreed upon that would come forward. MLA Young is just asking, could we deal with that at the end of this meeting? Would that be? It was on the agenda at the top. It was agreed that we would deal with it off the top. Okay. So so I will ask the witnesses to introduce themselves, and I'll begin with the witness on my far right, Mr. Bourgeois.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Robert Bourgeois, the Executive Director of Government Accounting with Finance and Treasury Board.
Mr. Gatien.
Good morning. Jeff Gatien, Department of Finance and Treasury Board, Associate Deputy Minister and Provincial Controller.
Deputy Dean.
Good morning, everyone. Kellyanne Dean, Deputy Minister, Finance and Treasury Board.
And Ms. Kumara Naika.
Hello, I am Lilani Kumara Naika, Associate Deputy Minister, Finance and Treasury Board.
Thank you. And now I would invite Deputy Dean to make opening remarks.
Thank you and good morning. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here today to contribute to the discussion on the 2023 financial report of the Auditor General. The Auditor General has provided a clean audit opinion on public accounts for the year ended March 31st, 2023. This is the 23rd year in a row that the Auditor General expressed confidence that Nova Scotians can rely on our financial statements. This means the Auditor does not have significant concerns regarding the reliability of the information presented in the public accounts. We take great pride in this accomplishment and strive for it every year. As Deputy Minister of Finance and Treasury Board, it's my responsibility to ensure we are meeting the high standards set out for us by the legislature and by Canadian public sector accounting principles so that Nova Scotians can remain confident in the management of taxpayer dollars. The report noted we are correctly following all current legislative requirements. As public servants, we help government shape their view of what is fiscally responsible and sustainable, and we use key indicators to guide us. Net debt to GDP is a good example. A stable net debt to GDP ratio indicates sustainability and fiscal capacity when the rate of growth in our debt is in line with economic growth. Other key indicators are the surplus deficit ratio and the net debt balance, which we monitor on both an annual basis and throughout our four-year fiscal plan. The Auditor General has recommended legislative changes to the process for additional appropriations. We have carefully considered this matter and believe the system in place is transparent and accountable to the public and legislature. The Minister of Finance and Treasury Board agrees, and that is reflected in the response to the recommendation. We recognize our duty is to follow the legislation as enacted, and we would certainly make any changes deemed necessary to the Finance Act if directed by government to do so. When the AG raised concerns about additional appropriations last year, The Department of Finance and Treasury Board responded immediately by examining our practices. As a result, detailed information about additional appropriations that had been provided to media is now also posted online so Nova Scotians know how government is using their tax dollars. We consider the recommendation to be satisfied and will continue to use our current approach. Accountability and transparency are the hallmarks of the Finance Act, and we adhere to these principles in all that we do. The financial reporting process begins with the tabling of the budget and debate on these estimates, which provides an opportunity for the legislature to question any aspect during that time. As the year progresses, there are required forecast updates before the end of September and the end of December, also providing an opportunity for members and the public to learn about how the year is unfolding relative to budget. If additional appropriations are required, these are made public at this time, with details tabled in the legislature or provided to the Clerk of the Assembly if the legislature is not sitting. This helps to ensure transparency and accountability to the legislature and provides members with the opportunity to ask any related questions in both committees like this and during question period. The public accounts serve as a final accountability document to close out the year, where the results are compared to the initial budget and the various additional appropriations are disclosed by order in council and by department or appropriated entity. Overall, we look at this as a very successful audit, and we're proud of this report. The Office of the Auditor General conducts important work on behalf of Nova Scotians, and there are many positives that should be acknowledged through the audit process. This past year, we implemented 2 new significant accounting standards, asset retirement obligations and financial instruments, implemented significant corporate restructurings associated with Crown corporations, and continue to further our work surrounding abandoned mines. Through all of this, we have benefited from an excellent working relationship with the Auditor General and her team. There's no question our reporting has improved as a result of our combined efforts. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Okay, so we're going to begin our. Everybody's an experienced hand at this table, so I'm not going to run through all of the, except for I may interrupt you when the time for each caucus elapses. So we will begin with the Liberal caucus. MLA Maguire.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just going to fire off a few quick questions. First of all, thank you all for being here. And if we don't see you after this, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year's, and Happy Holiday season. So we're in the middle of an affordability crisis. That's obvious to everybody, that from one corner of this province to another. Again, this government ran another surplus. So my question is how much of that surplus was made up of personal income taxes?
Ms. Kamaranaika?
So, thank you, Madam Chair. So it's the way the surplus is calculated actually is we take all of general revenues and we look at our expenses. So we can tell you the proportion of PIT in terms, or a personal income tax in terms of the general revenues. But there's no accounting to say this surplus had X% come from personal income tax.
MLA Maguire.
How much personal income tax revenue did the department bring in last year?
ADM Gation.
We had personal income tax of just over $4 billion last year, $4.06 billion. Components of that we would have disclosed as what we also refer to as prior year adjustments, which is properly accounted for in the year, but relate to revised estimates of previous years. If I have 1 minute, I can find that in the. Okay.
MLA Maguire.
So $4.06 billion was personal income taxes drawn in from the government in a time of affordability issue and crisis. What was it? How much did it increase year over year percentage-wise? So the year before, how much did we bring in? And was that $4 billion the highest amount that the province has ever brought in on personal income taxes in its history, or where would it rank historically?
ADM Gation?
Year over year, it was 3.3 the year before, so that's a $700 million increase on for percentage-wise 20%-ish. I don't know if that, it probably is the highest we've ever had with inflation, and as things go up, it likely is the highest number that we've had.
MLA McGuire.
So we have the highest taxes in the country. Year over year, it's gone up 20%, the amount of money we're taking out of people's pockets. We're now up to over $4 billion that we're pulling out of people's pockets that can't afford to pay their rent, that can't afford to pay their mortgage. We have mortgages, I was just reading online, that 60% of mortgages are going to come due this year. 60%. With the vast majority of them struggling to be able to pay. And this was Canadian. This was a Canadian statistic saying that the average mortgage is going to go up $1,200 a month. So we have the highest taxes in the country. We now have the worst healthcare system in Canada. That was just reported. We're spending more money than we've ever spent in the history of this province. Has there ever been a conversation to actually give something back to taxpayers for some kind of relief? And that would include, while other provinces are doing tax reliefs, they're doing bracket tax, or bracket creep is another thing that could give instant relief to Nova Scotians year over year. Has there been a discussion to eliminate bracket creep and lower taxes and put money back into the pocket of Nova Scotians?
Deputy Dean?
Thank you very much for the question, and we appreciate that. You know, absolutely, it is difficult for many people in this environment with rising interest rates, and it's challenging. You know, with respect to looking at tax brackets, looking at other means to provide assistance to Nova Scotians, we're constantly looking at ways that we can utilize the revenues and make life better for Nova Scotians. The investments that have been made to date have been very targeted, as you would appreciate. You know, there are investments in rent supplements that have been made. There's investments you know, in energy efficiency, ways to relieve pressure of the cost of fuel for Nova Scotians, things that impact them very significantly as well. And, you know, we have to balance those investments and the assistance to Nova Scotians as well with the large investments that we're making in the healthcare system to try to affect change there. So it is a balancing act, and we try to look at what our fiscal capacity is and work with government to implement some of the decisions to date in areas that are very focused for support for those who need it the most.
MLA McGuire.
So the fiscal impact is $115.7 million surplus in 2022-23. The fiscal impact is the healthcare system in Canada, or Nova Scotia, is now the worst in Canada, after having the largest investments over the last 3 years. Largest investments in this province's history. The fiscal investment is that more people are living in tents and are without homes than in the history of this province. The fiscal investment is there was $0 given to people on income assistance. The most vulnerable Nova Scotians in this province. We're giving a 0% increase over the last 3 years in a time of the highest inflations, or some of the highest inflations in this province's history. So we continue to hear time and time again from department after department after department that targeted and you know, we're doing these investments and these investments are working. They're not working. They're not working. And if you don't believe me, go to Sackville. If you don't believe me, go downtown Halifax, where people are dying in tents. Tents are catching fire. And people, Nova Scotians, had to step up and purchase winter tents for them because their government would not do that for them. So this is where we're at in this province's history right now. We're at a turning point where the government is now spending millions of dollars on a Nova Scotia stampede, which we saw yesterday. instead of investing in people's lives. And I think it's absolutely shameful that we're sitting here in public accounts today with we had $115 million surplus, 20% increase in personal taxes is what was taken from people, a 20% increase because of inflation. $4 billion were taken from Nova Scotians, and we have nothing to show for it. So my question is how are we investing so much money into the healthcare system? More money than ever before, and it's getting worse. And this is not me being partisan. This is actually reports that were done that showed we now have the worst healthcare system in Canada. We have the highest taxes in Canada. We have the highest inflation in Canada. We have the highest rent prices in Canada. We have the least affordable housing market in Canada. Where's this money going? So I would like to know specifically what the department and what the government is doing to make people's lives better, because they're not seeing it. So where did that $4.6 billion in personal taxes go that are allowing people to actually get by and afford life?
Deputy Dean.
Thank you very much, and I certainly appreciate your concern and your frustration. This is a very difficult question for us to answer in Finance and Treasury Board. We're here to talk about the fiscal sustainability of the province and the means by which we ensure that those resources are available for the very programs that help people. And you know, the significant investments being made in health and community services and mental health and addictions, which are the priorities of this province, will take time to pay off, will take time to take root. And it's very difficult for us to comment specifically on those initiatives in health and on the initiatives in DCS. But what I can tell you is that I know that the folks in DCS in particular are working very, very hard on the homelessness situation. And they have resources and have increased resources to do that, to build pallet shelters, to look at other alternatives for those that are unfortunately intense, which is an untenable situation. And with respect to progress on health, I think that the health officials would be pleased to tell you all of the significant things that have happened under the action plan for health. And while it may not appear on a day-to-day basis.
Emily McGuire had signaled to me that he's heard enough, so I'm just going to move on to his next question. So just Emily McGuire.
I apologize, but you know, of course, departments are going to stand in here and sit in here, and say all the great things that are happening. Of course they are. But an independent study of the healthcare system showed that it's not getting better; it's actually getting worse. So let's just take a moment to look at this outside of government. If this was a private industry, this would be a failure. It would be a failure. That billions and billions of dollars are being spent on something to achieve something, and we're getting further away from that achievement. So I just don't know where the buck stops. And I know it's not with the individuals here today. So I apologize for my frustration. But, you know, when I have a family center or a doctor center closed down in my community, after asking the Minister of Health, will you put the resources in, and all they wanted was a family practice nurse to prevent 2 doctors from retiring, which would have been over 1,000 clients, and they said, we don't have the resources for that, and we lost 2 family doctors, the 2 of the 4 that was in our community. Like, so this is what's frustrating to me. We sit here in public accounts and we hear things like, we're investing, we have the resources, we're going to continue to invest, and then when we actually go to enact change, we're told, well, we don't have those resources. Do you think we have unlimited resources? And then we hear announcements around parties and celebrations and stampedes and all these things that, while would be great in a time of abundance, I would argue that the money that's being spent on these things could have easily been spent on winterized tents. You know, we were here last week and they told us that pallets that were supposed to be here in the winter, at the beginning of the winter, are not going to be here. So why, in a time of massive surpluses, we talk about targeted things we can do for Nova Scotians? A budget's coming up in the spring. Has there been discussion about cutting taxes in Nova Scotia, the most highly taxed jurisdiction in all of Canada? Will Nova Scotians see tax relief in the spring of 2024?
Deputy Dean.
That's something that I can't sit here and answer today. Obviously, we are beginning consultations around budget, and we are receiving feedback from Nova Scotians around things that are important to them for the budget process. So we will take all of that into consideration as we make our plans for the next budget.
Emily McGuire.
Just to pivot quickly, what's the current amount owed, total amount owed for the teacher's pension plan? The unfunded liability part.
Yeah. I'll just give the officials a moment to find that information. ADM Gation.
Page 96. Thank you. So the accrued benefit liability for the teacher's pension plan is $463 million as at March 31st, 2023.
MLA McGuire.
And my understanding is 50% of that responsibility is on taxpayers, right?
Deputy ADM Gation.
That would be the province's share of the obligation.
MLA McGuire.
So the amount, the liability amount is almost $1 billion total with both sides?
ADM Gation.
I believe that is true. There are complications when we look at our accounting obligation versus a funded, the status of the plan. So I don't want to do a multiply by 2 and it is equal, but it's a substantial sum, the unfunded obligation. It does change regularly based on markets. So if positive investment returns come, the funded status can improve, but it's a substantial deficit.
Emily McGuire.
Now you're all smarter than me, but this does not seem sustainable, right? Government after government after government, all three parties have passed the buck on this one, right? It was an issue under the NDP, it was an issue under the Liberals, and now it's an issue under the Conservatives, Progressive Conservatives, sorry. So my question to you is, when is this going to be dealt with? Because this seems like it is unsustainable, and this is people's lives. So we are, let's just round it down to 900 million, okay? Let's just use a number. When will that, what is the plan? Because we've heard nothing about this publicly. What is the plan to deal with this liability when it comes to the teacher's pension plan?
Deputy Dean.
Thank you. So there was an independent panel report done with some non-binding recommendations with respect to the plan, its status, and what could return it to fully funded status over a period of time. There's a sponsors committee made up of representatives from the Nova Scotia Teachers Union and executive and government. and we jointly share responsibility for any decisions around the plan and the recommendations, the non-binding recommendations in that plan. So what I will say is it is a significant issue. It is something that we are looking at very, very carefully. We're taking the time to do further due diligence on the recommendations or the non-binding recommendations in the plan. And I think it's important for me to reiterate that they are non-binding. The panel was asked to suggest a path forward, and we need to assess that ourselves to determine how it can be implemented. It is complex. That's one thing that I've learned sitting on that panel. What I will assure you of, though, is the fact that the current plan is not in any immediate danger. Nobody is in any immediate danger of not getting their pensions from that plan. It is, I believe, at a 75% funded status currently. But that's not to say that we don't recognize that there is still an issue that we need to come to resolution on.
Emily Maguire, you have just over 1 minute.
Yeah, I mean, it's great that it's not right now in any current danger. Not to say that it won't be. 25% underfunded is still 25% underfunded. What were the recommendations from the committee to move forward to deal with this issue?
Deputy Dean?
So we're still discussing those at the sponsors level, and when we're ready to determine what those next steps are going to be, we'll make the report available and we'll discuss the recommendations at that time.
MLA Maguire, 30 seconds.
How long have you had the report for?
Deputy Dean? That's okay.
We've had it since August of 2022.
MLA Maguire.
So 2 years is not enough to review, digest, and release?
Deputy Dean?
I know.
Not quite 2 years, I'm sorry. What I will reiterate is that this is a very complex situation that involves members of the plan and government, and we really have to be certain of the next steps. So we're taking the time that we need.
Order. Time for Liberal questioning has elapsed. We'll now move on to the NDP Caucus, and you will have until 9:47. MLA LeBlanc.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to start by thanking you all for all the work that you're doing. It is, I think, something to note that is the 23rd year that we have a clean audit opinion in the public accounts, so thank you for that. But I do, and I also want, before I begin, want to, again, begrudgingly agree with my Liberal colleague about the idea that we have such a huge surplus and the state that many people are living in right now in Nova Scotia. It is an untenable, unsustainable situation. People are dying, and there are solutions that could be, done today. There's church halls that could be open. We just need to get people inside and fed, and then figure it out. And I'm not a big, Band-Aid fan of Band-Aids, but I'm more of a fan of policy change that's actually sustainable. But I think in this case, we need to get people inside. The winds the other day were truly horrifying, and I spoke to a couple of people in tents in my community who were preparing to get inside or not, and how to protect their stuff. And it's just like, what is this world that we're living in, that this is the situation in Nova Scotia? But I'm not going to dwell on that right now. So I would like to talk about the additional appropriations and the transparency part of that. So it's not the first year that the issue of lack of transparency and accountability in our province's additional appropriation process has been flagged. In fact, the Auditor General last week noted that she is the third Auditor General in a row to point out this issue. Last year at this meeting, the department explained that the trend of increasing amounts of additional appropriations was a reflection of the volatility of all governments have experienced due to the pandemic. COVID-19, this is a quote, COVID-19 presented challenges in budget management overall, including estimating expenses and revenues, and that made sense. But it doesn't explain that rationale does not explain this year's circumstances. So, how do you explain last year's $1.66 billion in additional appropriations, which is the highest amount in the province to date?
Deputy Dean.
Thank you. So maybe I'll just provide a little context, and then what I'll do is ask Leilani to speak to the revenue increase side of the question, and then I will ask Jeff to talk specifically about the additional appropriations process. And I do want to say that, we were very concerned about a statement that 3 Auditor Generals had raised the issue, and took some time to go back through reports to determine just what the context was. So we've done that, and Jeff will share a little bit about that context shortly. So I want to assure you that we do take that very, very seriously. Leilani, do you want to do? Okay. So first, maybe Jeff, why don't you go through the context around the 3 Auditor General reports and what we determined was contained in those reports.
Ms. LeBlanc, are you okay with that?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, quickly.
Yeah.
ADM Gation.
I will be as quick as I can, but there is some context that's important with some of the changes in the previous Auditor General reports. Looking back through Auditor General Jacques Lapointe, and I believe it was February 08 that was referenced in the Auditor General's report this year. That recommendation was focused on an inconsistency in the previous Provincial Finance Act. The inconsistency in the Provincial Finance Act said that government should seek an additional appropriation when a department knows they will need more before the end of the year. So that seemed clear. There was a subsequent clause that said additional appropriations did not need to be sought until 90 days after the tabling of the public accounts. That previous act, we could table the public accounts. It was legislatively required before December 31st. 90 days after that would be the end of March, a year after the year had closed. So the Auditor General Lapointe had recommended that that inconsistency be rectified. When Graham Steele was Minister of Finance, he was open to changing the Finance Act. So we went in and that's where we've laid out the additional appropriation process we have today, where if a department knows they're going to be over, they are supposed to submit a report to the Minister of Finance to seek an additional appropriation, and we do that through the forecast process. So we marked complete on Jacques Lapointe's recommendation, and I do have a copy of the report, and I have a copy of the follow-up chapter where it's indicated that it's complete, and we've never heard another recommendation from Auditor General Jacques Lapointe on that. So we don't feel that it was a recommendation on transparency or accountability. When we get into the report from Auditor General Michael Pickup, we'd never received a recommendation, and quite honestly, I don't remember having conversations with the audit team at the time about lack of accountability or transparency. And in the chapter where recommendations come forward, the financial chapter, we didn't have recommendations on this. What we had was commentary which was similar to our financial statement discussion and analysis information, where we lay out what the numbers and trends are. And there was a comment from Auditor General Michael Pickup that additional appropriations almost doubled what it was the year before. And there was some discussion that the budget, the original budget, is challenged by all members of the legislature, and additional appropriations are approved by Executive Council, period. So it says, and additional appropriations are approved by Executive Council. There is no recommendation, and versus but. And just very quickly, in subsequent reports, October 2019, a chapter where he's just referencing again, without recommendation, appropriations. It does note that requesting additional appropriations is a normal part of government operations.
MLA LeBlanc?
Thank you. Yes, I understand all of that, and I understand that it is the current Auditor General who has made the recommendation, big R recommendation 2 years in a row. And she has been really clear that that the other Auditor Generals that you've referenced have mentioned these things but not made recommendations. But she's also been really clear that it is only in the last couple of years, i.e. under the current government, where the additional appropriations have been so large. Like if we look at in the last 10 years, so since, well, no, that's longer ago, since Graham Steele was Minister of Finance, but I think it's hang on one second. Nearly $2.5 billion spent in additional appropriations have been in the last 2 years. So 40% of the 10-year total have been in the last 2 years, which is why our Auditor General, I think, has been pushed to the recommendation stage on this. So I just really quickly remind everyone that this is in the last 2 years, $2.5 billion that have gone out the door without the scrutiny of the legislature. And, tabling a report to the clerk is not the same as, having a budget in front of the MLAs from all parts of the province and actually doing a debate and a study on those things. It's not the same. So I will just put it there, and then I guess I would love to hear from Ms. Kirmanaki. Thank you.
Ms. Kumaranayaka. I think we're going there, right?
Perfect.
Okay.
So as I prepared for today, one of the reasons why there was a large amount of revenue that was unanticipated, I think is part of, because that allowed the ability and additional flexibility for, or fiscal capacity. When we look at revenue estimates, there are two things, because we don't actually have revenues. When you file your income taxes we're just getting the data from 2022 now. So that's that lag. So to have the revenue that we have in our budget and our public accounts, we use two things. One is all the tax information we have and historical relationships, and the other is the economics. What know about what's happening in the economy and the trends in terms of tax revenues. So our world was going well till March 2020, right? And I just wanted to sort of recap. We saw some very significant changes. So our GDP actually declined, and it declined by minus 4.5%. That was as of the data that we got this November. So we had been budgeting on the basis of, it was going down by about 3%, and with this data lag, it's 4%, 4.5%. So when we get these sorts of changes in data, we update our revenues. And what we found with the period related to COVID, and it's still spilling over, because is that it was such a drastic change. Our models couldn't predict that, obviously, so we were using our best judgment. And when we budgeted, we found that there were things that, in retrospect, we saw. We saw that people were a bit more insulated in COVID than we anticipated. We saw people not spending. We saw savings go up. Nova Scotia had the highest savings rate that it ever had. We know that the unemployment was high, but at the same time, folks who were working weren't spending. As the economy started to open up, they started spending a lot more. It was that pent-up demand. And that partly has caused that inflation that we're seeing. And the problem, so there were all of these factors that we weren't anticipating, because we really saw a structural change because of what happened in COVID. And it's not just Nova Scotia, the Bank of Canada, all economists around the world are now trying to catch up to say, okay, we've had now 2 years of data, 2 or 3 years of data, we can start to, and then we are also understanding the factors behind the trends. So we're starting to get, I'm anticipating smaller and smaller prior year adjustments. But at the time, and for the last couple of years, what we expected in the economy and how people reacted wasn't what happened. And so ultimately, both in terms of the savings, they started to spend. And the other important thing with Nova Scotia was we started getting more people coming in. we had a tremendous increase in the number of our tax filers, and that also increased our personal income tax. We weren't anticipating the very high population growth rates. So all of that combined with these prior year corrections, plus more people in the province, has contributed to this unanticipated increase in revenues.
MLA LeBlanc, you have just over 7 minutes.
Thanks. Yeah, and listen, I like a surplus. I think that surpluses are exciting, but I ran a small budget for of a company for many years, and it's really exciting to anticipate a surplus, because then you figure out, well, we can pay people more or whatever, and this is good. It's not my problem is obviously not with the revenue. My problem is with the way, like, the transparency around it. So I guess getting back to that, we are the only province in the country that doesn't have a mechanism with which to deal with additional appropriations that brings them before the legislature. So, the Auditor General has pointed this out. Last year, you indicated that the department, if you were directed by the government, that you would make the change. Clearly, you have not been directed by the government. How can the department remain confident that the process is appropriately transparent when the province's Auditor General disagrees and every other province has stricter transparency processes?
Deputy Dean.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Well, first of all, we appreciate the Auditor General's position and her team's work on this. I think it's fair to say that sometimes we're not always going to agree. And I think on this one, our minister is satisfied that accountability and transparency is supported through this current process and through the Finance Act. We have done what we can to enhance the level of information that is available around the specifics of the additional appropriations. But again, we are following the Finance Act as has been followed by all governments and all ministers before this minister. So I would say that, given our minister's current position and comfort level with the process, we're not anticipating any further changes.
MLA LeBlanc, 5 minutes.
Thank you. With respect, I appreciate that. And
Order.
MLA Young.
Just with respect to the whole committee, it's when witnesses, yes it is, when witnesses are answering a question, it's for the benefit of the entire committee, not just back and forth. So when a witness doesn't have an ability to continue giving the answer, it's for the benefit, it's for the disadvantage
Thank you very much,
of the committee.
Mr. Young. That's not a point of order. We're going to move on. Ms. LeBlanc had signaled to me that she had heard enough, and as we have discussed at committee before, there are some witnesses who do like to give long answers, and I do give MLAs the opportunity when they feel that's happening to give me an eye, and I move on. MLA LeBlanc.
Thanks. And with respect, Madam Chair, I would love to have an extra minute attached to my time if possible.
So
but I was going to say, Ms. Dean, that I appreciate your answer, but again, like we've heard it already today, and that's why I want to move on to a couple of other things, just because when we look at the transcript, we'll be able to see several times the answer. I wanted to ask about the revenues again, though. So, do we have an assessment of whether the additional tax revenue has come from more people or higher incomes? And if we can tell that, what is the percentage?
Ms. Kumar-Naika.
So the answer is both. And I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, so I'm happy to table that. But we've had two things, and I'll just kind of flag it. We actually have been seeing compensation and household incomes increase. Currently, it's over 7% for this fiscal in terms of household income. So what we are seeing, and employee compensation is about 3 to 4%. I don't have the exact numbers, but I'm happy to table them. So we are seeing household income increasing. That's also another reason that we're seeing people spending. The second thing we're seeing is we have an increase in our tax filers. So again, I will give you those numbers. So it's a combination of both things happening, and it's really derived from the economic progress that we're seeing as well in Nova Scotia. And we saw that before COVID. We were starting to trend up, and then we had this COVID blip. But some of the economic fundamentals are still there for Nova Scotia, and we're seeing, and particularly with the population coming in, that it's really driving the revenue trends that we're seeing. Both spending, so that's HST, as well as income tax.
MLA LeBlanc, you have 3 minutes.
Great. So yeah, I was going to ask that. So similarly with HST, can we tell if it's that people are spending on more things, or it's just that the cost of goods is going up?
Ms. Kamara Naika.
We're seeing our HST, is about 70% of it is driven by consumer expenditures, and we're seeing people spending more above the rate of inflation. So obviously the part of it is that things that cost more, but again, because people have higher income, they're spending more. People have higher savings from the past, they're also spending more. This is a generalization. We know that there are other folks that are really struggling. So, and that's the problem with talking about aggregate tax numbers. It kind of masks that distribution. But from an aggregate perspective, what we are seeing is that our tax revenues are still quite solid.
MLA LeBlanc, 2 minutes.
Is there any way to figure out, like, do you have an analysis on that kind of spending versus income level? Like, do we, if we got the top 1%, we've got the, blah, blah, blah. Like, do you know who's spending? Oh, never mind. Actually, I'll think about that more and maybe ask next round. Wanted to quickly ask about the healthcare worker retention and recognition programs. The report found that the Auditor General report found that the return to nursing incentive in particular fell short of the projected uptake, with only 148 nurses returning. Can you speak to why this program did not achieve its intended result, and has the value of the program been assessed by the department?
Deputy Dean.
Thank you for that. So improving healthcare is this government's #1 priority, and this investment was intended to increase retention rates of nurses in the province and also encourage some that may have been retired to come back. And when the estimate was provided around the numbers, it was the maximum that could potentially take advantage of that program if they were to accept it. But we recognize as well that we have to account for, or we have to budget for the maximum exposure. So that's what we did. So it wasn't a target, it was maximum exposure for the program. And then the uptake depended upon individual circumstances. So I think there was an estimate of about 2,000 who might have been eligible, who were retired, that could potentially come back. And I think a couple of hundred did. 140. Oh, there you go, 140 or so. But, with respect to this particular program, it was focused on making sure that the workforce was strengthened in the healthcare sector because it is so critical.
The time for the NDP questioning has elapsed. We'll now move on to the PC Caucus. And if you heard any question that you feel was cut off too early and you wanted to hear a more fulsome answer, please do ask the question. Emily McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great to see you back, and I'm so glad that you did do that recommendation with adding the details, because I was one around the table last year going on those appropriations to actually give some more details versus it's this big amount. Like, I do want to thank you for that. But my big thing is the prior year adjustments drive me crazy. And I'm sure they do you too. You look at 21 to 22, it was $388 million. 22 to 23, it was $900 million. Is there anything that we're going to be able to do to get a better handle on what they are? And I'm going to let you pick who.
Ms. Kamara Naika.
we would be a fan of zero prior year adjustments, but we know it won't happen. And as I explained earlier, there were some extraordinary circumstances where just the work that we were doing, the modeling, and then because there's a lag in the data, has created those. And in addition, we saw some structural changes in the way people were behaving. So it's taken us a little while to catch up. We are now starting to see things returning to trend, so our models are starting to predict better. So over time, I think, again, we'll be within, typically we're within 1% to 2% of our revenues for prior year adjustments. So pre-COVID, that's the range that we've been in. So we hope to be within that range again as things start to normalize.
Emily McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So what it sounds like is previous to COVID, we didn't see these big numbers. It was within 1%, although 1% is a lot in these numbers. So that's good to hear. How do we estimate the revenues? Like, how is that process done? And do you, minus the last 2 years, and do you try and figure out what you think the prior year adjustments are going to be?
Ms. Kamara Naika.
Yeah, so I'll start. I'll just pick one example. So, for example, for, let's say, our personal income taxes, we know that there's lots of things that affect how much tax we collect. It depends on people's incomes. It depends on whether they're working, what kind of job. So we have tax models where we, because we don't have the actual tax data, we say, okay, if a person were earning this much money, typically we would get this much of tax. Now we have 1 million people here. We have about 600,000 tax filers. So it's a statistical model that we use, and we also use the inputs from our economics process because we need to know how the economy is going to feed in. So we have both our economic modeling and our revenue modeling. And I have to say, we're the only province in the whole of Canada where the revenue Auditor General reviews our revenues and our economic assumptions for budget as well as public accounts. So we work with them quite closely through the year. But the problem is, for example, for budget, we use data from November. The previous November, so obviously it's out of date already. And then we get more and more new information throughout the year that helps us refine our models, but that makes there's a difference between what we estimated at budget and the new data. And that's what causes that prior year adjustment.
Emily McDonald.
And apologize for, I'm sure, the people watching on the numbers, but I'm a numbers person, so I'm enjoying this. So how far, like, when does the budget process actually start? Let's just, I mean, you have a certain thing, like, or I guess the real question is, does it ever end?
Deputy Dean?
I guess I would say that it probably doesn't ever end, really, because we're reporting on the budget as we go through a fiscal year. But, a budget can take, really, I think 6 to 8 months, is that fair to say, of work around various areas, around the revenues, around the expenses, around borrowing. So it is a significant effort, but I mean, one that we all take very seriously, and one that, we strive to do to the best of our ability based on the resources that we have. So I don't know if I need to explain the cycle in any greater detail. You are all probably very aware of that.
Emily McDonald.
Well, I'm sure I'd love it, but I'm sure I'd bore a lot of people. I think I'd enjoy it. But for that point, I will defer to MLA Young now, Madam Chair.
MLA Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's been a lot of discussions around appropriations and the additional appropriations, and I know it's important to assure Nova Scotians that spending is being properly disclosed. Can you walk me through the appropriations process from start to finish?
ADM Gation?
Sure. So once we have the budget in place, as Deputy Dean just referenced, like, the monitoring against budget is what we start being quite focused on, like, deal with the actuals, deal with the circumstances. So as we go through the year, different events will transpire. Some things we call utilization pressures. There are other emerging priorities. We monitor with Leilani as well what might be changing on the revenue side. So at the, I would say the reasonably earliest stage where departments start feeling that they have significant insight into pressures mounting for the year where their original their appropriation may not be sufficient, they start communication. As we reach our public forecast update dates before September 30th, before December 31st, that's where the internal processes start getting ramped up a little bit more, more due diligence to little central perspective of our Treasury Board office or other officials, like validating pressures. So as we get to a public forecast update, we start to get what we would say is management's best estimate for what the remainder of the year looks like, and where departments exceed or are expecting to exceed their appropriated level, they will file a report to the Minister of Finance and Treasury Board asking our minister to seek an additional appropriation for their purposes. They line out what those purposes are, where the pressures have come from. Again, that has more scrutiny put on it to try to make sure that it truly is fully necessary. There aren't other savings in the department. There's not too much conservatism, too much optimism. So we try to balance it out. So as it goes and gets submitted through the Executive Council process, it's been reasonably well vetted by some central staff as well in combination with the departments. The departmental minister needs to sign off on the request to the Minister of Finance. The Minister of Finance needs to submit the report and recommendation to Executive Council. So I think that is, I'll stop there and see if there's any more nuance that you'd like.
Emily Young.
Thank you, Madam Chair. No, I appreciate your answer for walking through that process. I guess in the past couple of years, the Auditor General notes there's been additional appropriations and have been significantly higher in the past couple of years. And I think Ms. Kumar-Naiki might have touched on it, but how do you respond to that?
Deputy Dean?
So I think a function of that, as Leilani has explained, is about prior year adjustments and the fact that we had additional capacity. And the appropriations are higher. And I would explain that partly by saying that it allowed government capacity to address some key priority areas and respond to some unforeseen events like wildfires, like floods, and hurricanes, as well as making priority investments in healthcare, in housing, and ensured that they were able to use that capacity in ways to really advance key priority areas. So, and yes, those additional appropriations, when you look at prior years, are very high. I think Leilani's done an excellent job of explaining why revenue was so high. We would expect that will normalize. We don't expect to see these elevated levels of additional appropriations in the future, but what I will say is that it is an important tool of government to have the flexibility to be able to respond to circumstances that change throughout the year from what was originally anticipated during the budget.
Emily Young?
Yeah, no, thank you, Deputy Dean. This has been quite the year in Nova Scotians when you look at all the events and stuff, and in Shelburne, having lived through the fires and the devastation there. So I really appreciate your answer. I'll pass it over to my colleague, Emily Barkhouse.
Emily Barkhouse.
Thank you. So after what, MLA was correct in what he was saying. So can you give us some tangible examples of the additional appropriations that were needed or are needed?
questions and I don't have the answers.
Way to go, Dave. Yes, yes. You just let me know who's going to talk, and I'll I'll call on the person once you've got it there. Okay. ADM Gation.
So I have a few examples from our final additionals this year. Within advanced education, there were some small items relatively. There are student loan costs, $3.8 million. With Finance and Treasury Board, we had to seek an additional appropriation at the end of the year for $67.9, almost $68 million, as a result of how we would be supporting entities that we consolidate with the asset retirement obligations. So that was really an accounting adjustment that was required so that we would be positioned to centrally fund asset retirement obligations if assets were decommissioned at entities like the hospitals, schools, things like that. Just going from memory, back in March, we would have sought an additional appropriation for things like the nursing retention and recruitment incentive. That would have been required. Do you have a more complete list? Okay.
They are so small in glasses.
Deputy Dean.
Thank you. So further to the examples that Jeff provided, so for 22-23, there were health initiatives that were funded to universities through advanced education in the order of $120 million. In agriculture, this is a good example of $15 million that was provided for the grape and fruit industry to support the impact of the polar vortex extreme cold that impacted the crops. In environment and climate change, there was an investment of $140 million in funding for off-oil efficiency programs. So that's to help Nova Scotians adjust to a clean economy and to get off of furnace oil and use heat pumps. Another example would be in municipal affairs and housing, so $68 million for housing initiatives, as well as operating grants for municipalities, and then there was $26 million in Hurricane Fiona disaster assistance. So I think that those are some tangible examples of events that necessitated additional appropriations.
MLA Barkhouse, 6 minutes.
Thank you. So how are those additional appropriations disclosed and communicated to the public?
ADM Gation.
So in conjunction with our public forecast updates, our budget, and with public accounts, the year end, so those 4 times a year, is typically when we would be disclosing additional appropriations. There could be circumstances between those reporting dates where we would. But when the need is assessed and then approved by Governor and Council, then with our forecast updates, we typically go through our technical briefing with media, where opposition members are invited to attend, and I believe they are usually there, and certainly when the minister provides remarks. And we do go through the additional appropriations as its own slide to make sure that people understand what departments are seeking and the high-level rationale for why. We prepare a fact sheet that lays out by appropriation what department requires additional funds and what's been approved. And that's one of the enhancements we added last year, was instead of restricting that with easy access to the media at the lockup, that's now posted publicly as well when the order in council is posted. Through this as well, our legislation requires that we table in the House, if it is sitting, the order and if the House is not sitting, we table it with the clerk. So that's also where the accountability and transparency to the House, or to the legislature, it's what our Act establishes the process to be, and what we follow.
Emily Barkhouse?
Is that enough? Because the Auditor General's report states that all of the provinces but Nova Scotia have some form of legislative accountability on additional appropriations. So in your department, do you feel that's enough?
ADM Gation?
I certainly feel that it's appropriate. That's what our legislation lays out for us. It was passed in the House, obviously, by the legislature. I'll just circle back with my comfort with the Act to the premise of the Finance Act was to seek approval before commitments are made. My understanding of other jurisdictions, and I can't speak like really detailed about the other jurisdictions, but that's not approval before the fact. The legislative approval is after government has taken action and put wheels in motion. So the Finance Act was trying to strike the balance of make sure departments come in and seek authority up front, get approval, and then publicly disclose it as soon as the decision is made. So that's where professionally I feel that's appropriate. I'm not here to tell you that the Auditor General's opinion is wrong, but I can tell you why I'm professionally comfortable with how our Act is designed and how we execute it, and I'm quite pleased with how we roll out the communication we have with the media and members.
Emily Barkhouse, 2 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. The Auditor General commented on the $1 billion in spending in March 2023. Can you provide us with some of the insights into the spending process? Is this figure usual?
ADM Gation?
Yeah, and I'm not sure if the comment was on $1 billion in 2023 or if it was a little bit less as one of their audit procedures as the last week of the month. But like the province is a very large organization, $14 billion of consolidated revenue and expense. So like $1 billion in a month would be expected as far as expenses in a month. And then like things about in the last week, like that would be ordinary, I think, with an organization our size.
1 minute, Emily Barkhouse.
Okay, fair. I think I'll maybe ask one more question before I pass it over to my colleague, Melissa Sheehy-Richard, for the next round. Can you...
A reminder that you can't use the person's.
Oh, sorry. My apologies. MLA Sheehy-Richard. So comfortable with everyone here. Can you provide us with some insight into how the improvements in the net debt to GDP from the previous years improve our provincial economic output?
Ms. Kumara-Nayaka, you have 15 seconds.
Okay. It's now at 31.7% relative to for public accounts. That is provides the shows what the capacity for the economy is to
Order. The time for PC questioning has elapsed. We'll now move on to the Liberal caucus. Each caucus will have 12 additional minutes. MLA McGuire.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple of quick ones. A few years back, government announced emergency funding for air circulation for classrooms. That would have had to go through the Department of Finance and Treasury Board in particular. What was the total cost of that contract? Who received it, and how many schools were upgraded?
Ms. Deputy Dean.
Thank you for that. I'll have to get back to you with the details on that particular issue because we don't have those with us today, but we can get back to you.
MLA McGuire.
So, Madam Chair, I asked that those questions be answered and tabled. So we're looking for the amount, the schools that were impacted, who received the contract, and I would also like to know if this was if this went through the proper process for bidding. Like, was this a contract that was just awarded, or was it a sole, or did it go through the bidding process? So that's the information that we're looking for in particular, all that. In the last year or two, we've seen, again, massive increases in inflation and the cost of living. Has there been any discussion within the department, with government, in the last budget on decreasing personal taxes in Nova Scotia?
Deputy Dean.
Thank you for the question. I think, as I indicated before, with respect to budget conversations, the input that's provided and some of the recommendations and suggestions from the public are pulled together from that public consultation process. This issue has come up as something that's been raised, and it's taken into consideration as we do budget planning. What I can say is that, you know, we do strive to balance the expenditures with the revenues and balance priorities. So obviously, this is something that could be taken into consideration.
Emily McGuire.
So I'm not talking about the budget going forward for the spring. I'm talking the previous budgets. And the word balance keeps coming up. And the truth is that people cannot balance their accounts anymore. They can't balance the cost of living. They can't balance the cost of food. Government has a responsibility. And in a time where everybody's struggling, I think it's amoral to be taking more from them. We're running, we government, you government, are running massive surpluses. And I understand how economics work, but you're running massive surpluses in a time when people need money the most. Is nobody here right now? Does nobody see how that impacts Nova Scotians? Do we not see how? And I understand, again, I will go back to, like, you work for government, but the last two budgets, there has been no tax relief. There's been no personal tax relief. There's been an extra gain of 20%, $700 million. So I'm asking about the previous two budgets. Why was there what was the reasoning behind not giving tax relief to Nova Scotians in the most taxed jurisdiction in Canada?
Deputy Dean, 7.5 minutes.
Thank you for that. So I'm not going to get into the details of discussing budget deliberations. Those are made in confidence. What I will tell you is that actually I'm going to ask Leilani to speak a bit about the tax situation and who pays tax and who doesn't pay tax.
Madam Chair.
MLA McGuire.
I'm not looking for the who pay taxes and who doesn't pay taxes. What I'm asking about is specifically why this was not considered and why this was not done.
Deputy Dean.
So within the context of the provincial budget, we have been in a deficit position. If you're in a deficit position, it's very difficult to cut taxes. So decisions like that have to be made and informed with respect to the ongoing fiscal plan, because these aren't things that are done in response to one-time revenue bumps. These are decisions that are borne out over time. So again, it's a complex decision, and it's made with a number of factors and a number of priority areas that are considered by government. And what I can say to you is budget deliberations are upcoming, and they will be, and all of the feedback will be taken into consideration as we look at next year's budget.
Emily McGuire.
respectfully, at some point in the fiscal year, you know that you're running a surplus, right? We know that. Also, government is spending hundreds of millions of dollars on projects and on initiatives while they're in a deficit. So it's not like we're not spending money, right? This isn't about if there's money or if there isn't money. This is about priorities of government. That's exactly what it is. Because if government wanted to cut taxes tomorrow, they could cut taxes tomorrow. If government wanted to give $300 million in bonuses, they would give $300 million in bonuses. If government wanted to pay 3-4 times the amount for a hotel, they would do it. So we are seeing things being spent. We are seeing money going out the door at a historical rate. And yet, if you leave here and you go up to Parade Square, most Nova Scotians are in more financial peril than they've ever been in their entire life. People that have been told that if you work hard, you do the right things, you're going to be okay. So ultimately, you are the Department of Finance and Treasury Board. I've been doing this long enough to know how it works. Ultimately, every single program comes through Treasury Board. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it is from the Department of Community Services or if it's, you know that. So another question I have, has at any point there been a discussion at Treasury Board around increasing income assistance rates for the most vulnerable Nova Scotians?
Deputy Dean, 4 minutes.
No, I appreciate the question, but I'm not at liberty to discuss conversations that happen at Treasury Board. Those are confidential conversations. What you see is the outcome of decisions that are made at Treasury Board through the budget process, and the evidence is in what is being advanced through government priorities and what is being financed. So I apologize, but I can't be more specific than that.
Emily McGuire.
I think I'm just a little worried that there's nobody advocating for them within government. I don't mean within the bureaucracy. I mean within government. When we have a former minister who says, like, living in a tent's like going on holiday, right? Like, and I think you're right, Deputy Dean, that we are seeing the outcome of the decisions that are being made at Treasury Board. And what we're seeing is policies that are geared toward re-election. We're seeing apps that are being thrown out there and different things that are making no difference. And when we ask departments in public accounts basic questions like, when are the pallet homes going to be here? No idea. No idea. When we ask yourselves around income assistance, we can't tell you. So I'm just thinking, like, it's troubling to me that we're in this moment in time in Nova Scotia right now where everybody's struggling, and I think that people's faith in elected officials and government officials are at an all-time low, And the announcements we hear coming from government, and I'm not just meaning, you know, the announcements that we're hearing from government are not making a difference in people's lives. And it's painful to me because I actually watch, as much as we want to blame the feds and we want to blame the municipality, and this seems like there's this big blame game. Every day I turn on the news, it seems like Minister Fraser and others are making these announcements. And they need provincial partners, and they need municipal partners. And the one thing we continue to hear from them is that they don't have provincial partnership in Nova Scotia, especially when it comes to some of the biggest problems that impact us. So I want to know here today, when are Nova Scotians going to see relief? You are the Department of Finance and Treasury Board. You take the money from Nova Scotians. When will Nova Scotians see more money, i.e. lower taxes? You know, we saw in a moment of when the price of gas went through the roof. The government refused to budge while every other jurisdiction gave money back to people that need it the most. And in fact, the contradictory reason was, well, they don't need to drive. And then when it came to the carbon tax, they exploded and said every Nova Scotian needs to drive. So I would like to know here today, the most taxed jurisdiction in all of Canada, the highest inflation, the worst rent prices, the highest mortgage prices. We literally have a generation growing up right now that are not going to be able to afford homes. $15 for a head of broccoli. When are Nova Scotians going to receive relief? And that starts with the personal income taxes.
Deputy Dean, 20 seconds.
Sorry.
I appreciate your perspective very much, and I know that it is difficult for many Nova Scotians. What I can tell you today is that, we are going to be deliberating.
Order. Time for Liberal questioning has elapsed. We're now over with NDP questioning. Emily LeBlanc.
Thank you. I just wanted to say at the end of the last round, we were talking about health, the health bonus. And I just wanted to say, Deputy Dean, that I appreciate the way you described that bonus. From an accounting point of view or a budgeting planning point of view, you talked about it as the maximum exposure. When we heard about it from the government, when it was announced, it was, look how many people we are going to attract to nursing. And I just want to point that out. It's a refreshing take on that amount of money. This is how much it could be. This is how much it actually was. But when CNS and the communications people get involved from the department, it becomes a whole different story. So I thank you for clearing that up in terms of how budgeting is done. I also wanted to say the question that I sort of messed up on earlier about the spending and basically the question is very simply, is there a way to analyze or see a breakdown of spending across income brackets?
Ms. Kamara-Nayaka?
Yeah, we could, but it's not through the tax data. Okay. So it would need to be, there are surveys that Stats Canada does, but it's not through the tax data. Yeah.
Emily LeBlanc.
Great. Another very quick question. Is there an accounting best practice for dealing with surpluses? Shall I clarify that? When you're budgeting, often people will budget or groups will budget for a balanced budget, but when you see that there's going to be a surplus, is there an accounting best practice? Do you then spend it in additional appropriations? Do you then roll it? Is there a better, how is it best done, used, dealt with?
ADM Gation?
I would say no, there's not. It all goes in sort of the bucket of priority of government in the moment, balancing current and balancing the medium-term outlook for sustainability. You'll see some of those principles in the Finance Act as well about how we're to conduct ourselves. So early in the Act, there's a few principles around there. But there's no simple answer to that. Okay, great.
Deputy LeBlanc.
So I just wanted to get back to the appropriations one more time. So Deputy Minister Gation, Associate Deputy Minister Gation, you said earlier that doing what the Act says, you feel comfortable with the practice because you are following the letter of the law, as it were. You're doing what the Act prescribes in terms of how to deal with additional appropriations. But I would say that doing what the Act says is different than answering the question, do you think the Act needs to change? And so I want to get at this in one more way. So governments may need to make additional spending decisions, but when it's 10% of the budget, I think that I will put forward that many people, including the Auditor General, think that this is something that needs to be dealt with in a different way. So my question is, what is the downside of changing the Act and making there be more accountable and transparent mechanisms? What is the downside to that?
ADM Gation?
I think the downside would be approval after the fact. Right now, the Act is constructed in a way that we do our best to get decisions made before initiatives are advanced. So with the public forecast update timing, we're supposed to be getting authority in place before wheels are put in motion, so a government decision. I feel with the rigor that goes in the budget, and then the accountability measures, the explanations provided at our forecast updates with the actual budget compared to forecast, there is a lot of transparency, and I do feel there's a lot of public accountability, and I do feel that it is accountable to the legislature. So is it a significant downside? Maybe not, but professionally, I think the Act is constructed well, so that decisions are made, and with the communications that go out with the appropriations. The approval before it happens, I think, provides people a lot of opportunity to hold government accountable for the decisions they've made, and I believe it's done transparently. So I think that's the basis of why professionally I'm very comfortable with the Act and how we adhere to our accounting principles and our disclosure of financial information. I also feel it is fair for not only departments to manage within their appropriations through the year, but also government as the circumstances change. I think it's well understood at budget time that the main title of the book are the estimates. And there's a lot of discussion that goes in with many interested and affected parties about how the actuals could change from what we're budgeting today. So the fact that circumstances change and there's a lot of things that government needs to react to, it can be things like utilization rates of family pharmacare, just pressures that emerge that are higher than what we thought. Those need to go up. So that's where I'm personally, it doesn't matter what Jeff Gation personally feels, but professionally I feel like it's good as it is.
Emily LeBlanc, 5.5 minutes.
So, totally different subject now. The report, the Auditor General report, showed significant revenue increases in both liquor, not the Auditor General report. The public accounts showed significant increases in both liquor and gaming. I'm wondering if you can confirm or deny if these revenue increases have led or correspond to increases in preventative programming around gambling and addiction. So we saw lots of money coming in because of gambling and booze. Is there money being spent to, to counter the damaging effects?
Deputy Dean?
Thank you for that, and I will have to get you the numbers. There have been more investments made in mental health and addictions in the Office of Mental Health and Addictions, and so certainly those investments would help address any issues related to gambling, alcoholism, some of those perils. But I can find out for you.
Thank you.
MLA Burrow?
Well, just concluding back with this question of the publicly unexamined additional appropriations. And I want to come to the dimension of this. I think it's a key dimension. The extent to which we are an outlier in the Federation. I think that that's one of the reasons why this issue has emerged as a public issue. It's not very often an accounting issue, it becomes a public issue. But Nova Scotia has a different standard, does it in a different way. Often in the Federation, when this is the case, the outlier jurisdiction, which we are on the question of accountability of additional appropriations, has some rationale for what in their particular circumstances calls for this outlier path for dealing with the matter. We see this in lots of different areas. So we have in the House asked for? What is this reasoning? What is it in our situation? What is it in the advice that the government is receiving through your departments that justifies our outlier position? And we have not heard this. I think that's what's being called for in the public discourse about this question. So we are offside from the general level accountability standard on publicly unexamined additional appropriations. I think the core question before us is, what is the rationale that your department and that the government offers for this being the case?
ADM Gation.
So the rationale, I think, is we are following legislation that was passed in the House back in 2010. So professionally, I have no basis, and I almost wonder if in my role it would be inappropriate for me to think that the act is wrong. There's nothing in it that causes me professional challenge, and I do believe the transparency and accountability is fine. So if this was a matter that the House was looking to change, we would absolutely follow that, and we would adjust our processes. But legislation to table to approve things after decisions were made, I'm not sure if that's great accountability to get approval after things have already been done. So that's where the act was, with governor and council approval, to have those items decided on before action is taken by departmental officials.
1 minute, Mr. Burrell.
Thank you. I guess what it is at its core is not an issue of whether the act is being adhered to or whether the recommendations have been properly pursued. At its core, this matters because it's an issue of public confidence. The Auditor General's examination of this question has, I think, given the public the understanding that it is reasonable to have your confidence in question about the practices of adequate accountability that we're pursuing in Nova Scotia. Now, Deputy Dean, when you were speaking to this earlier, you said, and we've heard this earlier in the House, the minister is satisfied as to the adequacy of this. We've heard this lots of times.
Order. Time for NDP questioning has elapsed. We'll now move back to the PC Caucus. MLA Barkhouse.
So I'd just like to go back to my question before we get cut off so you could finish. And this was about the insight into improvements in the net debt to GDP from the previous year, improve or our provincial economic output, and that is to
Ms. Kamara-Naika?
So just to, the net debt to GDP basically assesses our ability to financially bear the burden of the debt. Right, so the lower the ratio, the better. And typically, folks look at around 30% as a good target to move towards. So right now, as of the public accounts, so the closing of the 22-23 fiscal year, it was at 31.7%. These numbers just mask a little bit of something, because really the issue is if it's important to try and lower that per percentage more because we spend time servicing the debt. So if we, and that's the reason why the department keeps an eye on fiscal sustainability, because if you spend and spend, you also have to take into account that you need to borrow, and then you will end up paying additional payments to service the debt, money which could be used for programs. So there's always this balance, and that's part of that budget process, this kind of balance to say, okay, we would love to spend to achieve all of our priorities immediately, but then the tension is if we don't have enough revenues, we're continuing to borrow, and it's just like your own household budget. If you're spending more, you're starting to pay interest payments, whether it's on your credit card or you've had a loan. So that's the tension that we're always looking at, and that net debt to GDP kind of tells you, is your debt affordable?
Emily Barkhouse.
Thank you, Chair. So we know that the federal GDP is sitting at, I think, 42%, and ours is at 33.1, if I'm not mistaken. 31.7. 31.7. Thank you. I'd like to know from the experts, you guys, what does this tell us about our province, the health of our province?
Ms. Kumaranayaka?
As I said, typically, I mean, and just to mark it, there are countries with over 100% ratios, right? So we're doing pretty well. But for us, you know, a range around 30 to 35 is good in the sense that it's saying your economy is generating enough revenue to be able to bear the burden of the debt. You can continue to make your debt payments, for example. So it's just like your analogy with your house. You've borrowed and you continue to be able to make your mortgage payments. So the federal government, their debt, I think the concern is not just the level, but it's increased quickly over a very short number of years, and that's when people start worrying. So really, and one of the things that we also keep an eye on is our credit ratings, because the credit ratings really determine whether borrowers are willing to give us our payments at a lower interest rate. So if you're able to show that you're on a fiscally solid track and that you're keeping an eye on that, then there's more favorable reaction from our lenders.
Deputy Aide. MLA Barkhouse.
The chair keeps trying to give me that raise. Thank you, and thank you for answering those questions that I left off on. I will now pass it to MLA McDonald.
MLA McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm not sure which is going to take this, but, and it's been discussed somewhat about the recent changes in the accounting standards that's impacted the public accounts for Nova Scotia. Are you expecting any further accounting standard changes in the future? I'm not sure who's going to take that.
Mr. Bourgeois.
So to answer the question, no, not to the impact that we've seen in the 22-23 public accounts. Asset retirement obligations was a huge standard to implement. Financial instruments was another huge standard to implement with a lot of impact. So on our statement of financial position, we show $608 million in ARO, asset retirement obligations, that we had to add to our balance sheet. So to that impact, we don't expect it. There's always new standards that come. There's 3 in front of us, but we don't expect any impact to this magnitude in 23-24.
Emily McDonald.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm just going to give you the chance of, do you know of some coming up that might be small impact, medium, or is just any you want to comment on?
Mr. Bourgeois.
Yeah, sure. So there's three in front of us. One is on P3s, public-private partnerships, and we don't expect any impact on that other than maybe some disclosure in the back half of our public accounts, because we feel that we're already applying those standards today. So no impact there, or no impact from a change perspective. The other one is on a general revenue standard, which right now we have all departments going through all of their revenue sources, aside from taxes, aside from interest and investment income and other sources of revenue, but general revenue like fees, licenses, those types of revenues, we're going through to make sure that we are consistent and applying the new standard. And right now, we don't think there's going to be much, if any, impact on that from a revenue recognition perspective.
Emily McDonald, 3.5 minutes.
Perfect. Thank you, Madam Chair. And one thing for ADM-gation. My member opposite was talking about the changes or the request from the 3 different Auditor Generals, and you didn't get to finish your comment onto it. I just wanted to know, did you want to finish? I think you got to whoever was before. So is there anything you wanted to finish on that comment that you weren't able to?
ADM-gation?
No, I think I was like largely summed up just where I think Michael Pickup in his commentary, his final sentence in the paragraph was this was an ordinary part of government business or operations. So we didn't feel like there was any lingering expectation from either of the previous Auditor Generals, Auditor General Lapointe or Auditor General Pickup, on this particular issue. I'm not trying to discredit the value of the public conversation on this, but just I think Auditor General Adair is the first Auditor General to pick up on this issue, and it's a worthy public discussion.
MLA McDonald?
About 2 minutes?
2 minutes.
So as FTB is the central agency for various reports, recommendations that come from the Office of the Auditor General, can you give us some insight into the relationship with the AG?
Deputy Dean?
Certainly. Thank you for the question. We greatly value the relationship that we have with the Office of the AG, with the AG herself, with her staff. There are many reports, obviously, that the AG does, and those can result in learnings, areas of improvement, ways that government can do better, and we appreciate the recommendations and we will work with departments on some of the reports that they may receive from the AG where we can provide assistance. But, you know, the work that we do together, and particularly the heavy lift on the year-end audit, takes a lot of back and forth, a lot of exchange of information, and we know in a timely manner we're all working together to try to make sure that the information is provided so that the AG and her team can do their work. And I would say, I don't want to speak for the AG, but I think that we do have a good working relationship. And are there times where we disagree? Sometimes we do. And, you know, there's professional opinions and expertise among the staff that is respected, and you know, healthy debate that happens as we work together. And one thing that I also just want to mention, I don't want to lose sight of the fact that, you know, this report, we've talked a lot about additional appropriations and some of the contents of the report, but I do want to recognize the significant effort of government and also of the AG's office in producing a report that, you know, says that Nova Scotians can have confidence in the reliability of the financial information that's being presented by government. So I think that speaks to public confidence very highly. And
Order. So time for questioning has elapsed, and I'd like to give the deputy the opportunity to make some closing remarks. Ms. Deputy Dean.
Thank you very much. Again, I want to thank you all for your interest, for your comments, and also thank the AG and her team for their work. And I just wanted to close by saying we're very proud that this is the 23rd year in a row of a clean audit opinion. So thank you very much, and happy holidays, everybody.
Thank you very much, Deputy Dean, and I know we all enjoyed hearing the insights from the department on the thoughts of successive auditors general on the particular issue of additional appropriations. So with that, you're released to go out into the world, and we will move on with committee business. I don't think we don't have a cast of 1,000 here, so I think we can just continue along. We had informally agreed on a couple of topics coming forward to the committee to ensure that we actually do have meetings set up for January. So the members would have a copy of the topics that had been that had come to the Auditor General. The Auditor General had taken a look at them and sent them on to us. And the the first and the third were what had been discussed and agreed to informally. Emily Young, I think you had something you'd like to say.
Madam Chair, I think, and you know, normally the subcommittee process is where we choose topics. I'm wondering if maybe an opportunity may provide that topics that all of us unanimously agree upon, we could have a poll or something which would need unanimous consent to pass. Just when you have your timing for this here, how you booked it, it's before the holidays, so things that we unanimously can agree on, we should be able to unanimously poll to get as topics. Do you understand what I'm talking about? Yeah.
No, I don't think I do, and we do have a meeting booked for right after this to discuss the rest of the list.
Sounds like a perfect time to go through.
So having agreed to this, which I think was in fact the honourable member's suggestion at that committee, are you now saying you don't want to go with these with 1 and 3? Is that what you're saying? Emily Young?
I just think in order to truly have a meaningful and fulsome conversation, that the subcommittee would provide that. And if you could just hear me out, and I'll explain it one more time. You know how we'd have to have polls in the past with unanimous that had come out? If we could all agree on topics that are within the agenda of the subcommittee and we unanimously agree on them, rather than have to wait for the new year for those topics to come back to this committee, we could poll the ones that we unanimously agree on to be made public and book the meeting.
So are you saying, I just want to make sure that I understand what your suggestion is. And I see you, MLA LeBlanc. So are you saying that you don't want to do what we agreed to last week? Is that correct? And what you would like to do is have topics that are, we'll have our meeting at the end of this meeting, and we will discuss topics with the subcommittee. From there, those would go out to the committee, the full committee, for approval instead of having the meeting in public.
No.
I honestly just don't understand what you're saying there. Yeah.
Just for clarity, my understanding was that you had concerns about the timing that we booked this here to ensure we have adequate witnesses, right?
Right.
So during our meeting, we talked maybe that we could approve something that would be unanimously agreed upon, so we would have witnesses and stuff in the new year. So what my recommendation would be, I mean, if we have time to wait till the new year, let's wait till the new year and approve everything then. But I'm just looking for options so you have witnesses. I think
Okay, Emily LeBlanc, I think you had your hand up, and then Emily McGuire.
Well, I think I have no ability to back up why I think this is a bad idea, but I just think that, like, the member says, it's because, this idea would be to, like, help us get our witnesses in order and da-da-da, but the fact remains is that when we do an online poll, it's secret, and we don't know, like, someone could vote it down, and then we're back at square one, and we don't know who has done that, and I think we need to make these decisions in public at a public meeting. I also do just want to get back to the issue at hand, which is, like, in a quote-unquote in-camera meeting, i.e. our meeting last week, we decided on these two topics. This is the only public meeting we have until the new year, so we need to confirm that these are topics going forward. We don't need to do anything in secret. We have them in front of us. Let's just vote on them.
Emily McGuire.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And obviously, I wasn't here last week. I was in the throes of a bad flu. As kind of can hear it today, but so I did miss. I did miss what happened last week. So can I just get a little bit of clarification? Like, were there two topics that came out of that meeting that we had consent on? And then we had decided that we were going to vote and pass it today for the new year. So if I could just get, I mean, is that what happened? So I don't understand what we're doing then. Like, if if we had agreed, if people had agreed, let's just get it done, people. If two topics were agreed upon by all three sides, let's just get it done. Let's get it over with. Let's vote on it. And let's move on from there. I don't like this whole thing about honestly having these votes, because it goes sideways. I can tell you, that I can honestly say to everyone in this room, there was one vote in particular that I didn't fully understand what the vote was for, and I think I voted against it, and then I reached out to, and so it was defeated, and then I reached out to the chair, or not the chair, but the clerk, and I was like, is that what this was meant to be? And the clerk at the time was like, no, this is what it is. So I just think that if we're going to have these discussions, I think that we should just have the vote. So, and it's better to have the vote here in person where there's a record. So I just called the question.
Emily Young?
Listen, I was just putting options out there, nothing secretive, nothing, So with that said, I feel that we should continue with the way that we were doing this. The topics that we have, the normal procedure is that we discuss it in subcommittee and then we ratify it. So I move that we continue the process established by the Public Accounts Subcommittee.
Emily LeBlanc?
Madam Chair, thank you. This is unbelievable to me. This is unbelievable. Last week we decided on these topics. Last week we passed a motion that would make us have our subcommittee meeting at the end of this meeting as opposed to the beginning of this meeting. And now we see exactly the reason why. So that we do not have to decide on these topics until after the holidays. If I am wrong, then prove me wrong. I'm going to make a motion that this committee approves the following topics. Number one, the status update on infrastructure projects, progress, spending, and timeline, including QE2 redevelopment, construction of transitional care facilities, CBRM healthcare project or healthcare redevelopment project, etc. I move that that be a topic for after Christmas, and I also move that the government compliance to legislation, policy, and guidelines for procurement of capital projects, goods, and services also be made a topic for in the new year. That is a motion on the table.
So actually, we already had a motion on the table from.
Question on the original motion.
Yeah, you can call a question, right? We already had a motion on the table from MLA. Yeah, no, he actually used the word motion. He did use the word motion, correct?
Yes, he did.
Right?
I move.
Yes, so he did say it was a motion. You can amend the motion. But there is a motion on the table. Does MLA LeBlanc wish to amend the motion?
No, I wish to vote on the motion.
Okay, so the motion was that we go back to the, yes, we go back to the way that it has normally been done, despite the motion in an in-camera meeting that wasn't really even an in-camera meeting, despite the motion from Mr. Young to do exactly not that. Emily McDonald.
Can we do a 2-minute recess, please?
Please. Certainly, yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so the committee is now back to order. We will now vote on MLA Young's motion that we return to the old way of choosing topics.
Not return to continue with. Call the question.
I'm calling the question. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Contrary-minded, nay? Nay. The motion is carried. Yes. We will move on to the decisions from the December. Yes, MLA McGuire.
So I'd also like to put a motion on the floor to approve topics 1 and 3. So those topics were discussed in a quote-unquote informal subcommittee. And so I'd like to put a motion on the floor that healthcare infrastructure projects and the government procurement process and practice, which was agreed to in good faith, will be the topics moving forward in our January meetings.
So I think that is, I'm not sure how that works. I'm just going to ask a ledge council.
I can put a motion on the floor for anything.
Yeah. So why don't we just call this vote, because we have other stuff that we have to get through?
Madam Chair.
Yes? MLA Young?
Yeah, thank you. The reason that I'm asking to do our committee is the way that we normally do it is because it takes time. It takes time to go through the topics. It takes time to go through the witnesses, and that's the function of subcommittee. So it's not that anything else besides the ability that it takes.
MLA Young, that was the case last week, and you agreed to this, and then you reneged today. So I'm just going to say that.
Can we call the vote?
So we're just going to call the vote.
Recorded vote.
Recorded vote, fine, we're doing this now. Yeah, I'm sorry, but,
It's his committee.
so, please call the roll.
Point of order.
Please call the roll.
Point of order.
Please call the roll.
All right, MLA Young.
Madam Chair,
Please call the next one.
MLA.
We're voting. We're voting. Yes or no?
how can we vote when I'm still discussing?
Because here we are again, the government is trying to ensure that this committee cannot function. You agreed to something, you reneged on it, we're having a vote. Can you please vote? MLA Young.
Point of order. Point of order. I'm not done discussion on this when I was cut off and demanded to have a vote.
Sorry, I'm sorry, I can't hear.
Recorded vote. We're not allowed to speak during a recorded vote.
Can you please answer yes or no?
I would like ledge council to
Recognizing.
Mr. Hebb.
Well, I think there's a point of order. The point of order has to be dealt with.
Mr. Young.
The point of order, I believe, was raised before the vote.
I haven't finished discussing this, and I was going to amend the motion.
Amend away.
I move that we, and just beforehand, we discussed that we were going to talk about topic selection within the subcommittee and pass that motion. So now to take the topics back out, to put another topic on, it's, so my amendment is I move that we table this topics until it's discussed at the subcommittee. That was the motion beforehand. That was the motion that was voted successfully on. And it's the normal practice of the committee. It's no different than when the Liberals were in power. It's no different than when the NDP was there. It's just the normal practice of the committee.
Again, the discussion was that on suggestion from the government caucus, we divert from that. And that was what was agreed to. And so it's really difficult for me to take the sincerity of your desire to return to the way that things were done, when in fact the suggestion was from the honourable member to do something completely different. order. The meeting is now over. And we will move into subcommittee at quarter after, at 11:15, to discuss topics for January.